Welcome to another episode of the Wild and Well podcast. Today, I have Amanda Klecker, who is a building biologist, to come on the podcast to talk to us all about how we can create healthier homes for our families. So, before we get into all that, Amanda, I would love to hear what is one thing that you've done today to take care of you?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. Well, first, thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited. Um, I got up right away this morning. I didn't look at my phone and did some yoga and drank all my water, did some dry brushing. That's like my time before I decide to look at anything else or read anything else. It's just time for me.
That's beautiful. What a great way to start the day. I think we could all take a few notes from what you're doing. Can you share a little bit about yourself and what it is that you
Yeah.
do?
Yeah, so I am a building biology practitioner and a certified home inspector, kind of a healthy home expert, if you will. And what I do is help families to kind of walk through their spaces with a fine-tooth comb, find ways to reduce toxins in big and small ways. Sometimes we do this when, they're maybe going to stay in their home long term or for a few years, or even at the beginning when you're going to be buying a home, which is kind of a fun time to be walking through and figuring out how we can make this a healthy space that really supports health and wellness rather than the opposite, which is burdening it down with elevated toxins and or the stress even of trying to figure out how to create a healthy space. So pairing all that together to create kind of a sanctuary for your body.
That sounds lovely. So what got you into building biology? I
Yeah,
This is a field that I am fascinated by. I've bought
yeah.
books on it. I've studied environmental medicine, which touches on it,
Okay.
but it seems like a very new field. Is that correct?
So it actually is not that new. It has been around for quite a while. It, started in Germany, originating in Germany in like the 1970s. And so it has really like if you think about it, I mean it's relatively new in terms of like our modern world, right? But it has been a while, or it has been around for a while, where people maybe just weren't aware of it. And I think now we're starting to hear about it more and more. Um, so, I will like kind of condense my long and windy story, but I have always had a love of health and wellness. I grew up in a home where, we kind of embraced a more holistic side of health first before, kind of turning towards more modern medicine. And so it gave me just this base, right? And I always kind of loved just fitness, nutrition, and I also loved homes. And growing up, we moved a few times, and each time would get to kind of go through the process of finding a home, changing a home, and really kind of learning the ins and outs about that home. And so I've always kind of had these in the back of my head. When I was in my 20s, the home that we lived in, it was kind of a rural area right outside the Twin Cities. We all had private wells. They were contaminated by improper chemicals being improperly dumped or like wasted. And so it was traveling into groundwater and then getting into people's wells. There were a lot of people that were very sick. This was like the catalyst for like, wait a second, how can this happen? How is this allowed? Also, what are these chemicals from? To find out they're from creating Teflon pans and creating carpet, barriers for moisture and stains, and then thinking, wait, but these are actually in our house. And so that just kind of fueled this realization that we really have to be very careful about what we allow into our homes. And we need to start really paying attention to drinking water that we all thought, was safe for us. And so through that, I took a couple of environmental science classes, decided to really learn about water treatment, and with learning about water treatment, discovered building biology and just kind of paired it with my love of homes and health. And so it all just kind of has come together. They've had these little breadcrumbs along the way that have just kind of like pushed me to this spot.
Very cool. It's always amazing to hear the journeys and how people get to where they are. So why is
Yeah.
the health of our home important? Like you touched on some things there, but can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. So I think especially now, when I started doing this, it was about 9 years ago. People weren't actually, working from their homes even as much as we are now, with people being in their homes so much. You start to realize that the environment that you're living in is really playing a role in your health. The typical person spends about 80 to 90% of their time in their house. And when we think about the house, I like to kind of think of it as like a second skin. So if you think about your skin as a barrier for your internal organs, it can protect your internal organs, but then also what you're putting on your skin could also be hindering or impairing some of the internal processes of your body. Your house is the same way. And so if you think about it as this protective layer around you, you can really do a lot with it and it can really benefit your health and your wellness. When we talk about burdening your body, we're thinking like a weakened immune system, disrupted hormones, increased risk of chronic disease. So, all of these things can start taking a toll on your body if you're not paying attention. It's the same with anything in our world. If you eat food that, nourishes you, it will heal your body and benefit your body. If you eat food that, is going to negatively impact your body, all of a sudden, you're not going to feel good. So it's the same thing with our homes, and it's just another layer to this, your total health and wellness, in my opinion. But the environment that we're in plays a huge role in how we function.
Yeah, it makes sense. When you think of a plant, we don't
Yeah.
look at the plant if it's struggling and think, oh, there's something wrong with that plant. We think about its environment, and we're not any different, are we?
Totally. That's a great, yes, that's exactly what it is. I mean, I think so often this is like the last part of a health and wellness journey, which you think about the ways that you're exposed to toxins. You ingest them, you may breathe them in, inhale them, or they're being absorbed into your skin. And really, truly, when you're just sitting in your house, and I know this is one of these like gross things, you're actually being exposed to toxins all three ways. We actually consume like overspray from cleaning chemicals and dust more often than I think a lot of people realize. And so when you're being exposed these three different ways, you think about food that's just ingestion. If you think about, lotions and products, usually that's just absorption. But in your home, some of these chemicals and toxins, formaldehyde, phthalates, we're actually kind of just being bombarded because our body has these three routes of exposure where we have the opportunity to, be exposed just in more ways than just, eating something or putting something on our skin. And so we really have the opportunity to fix our environment to make it healthier. It's kind of like putting, if you took like an apple, it was beautiful and it's like this really fresh apple and you put it in like a wet paper bag in a dark room. Of course, it's not going to be good anymore, but if you leave it, you like wash it and leave it out on the counter or in the fridge, then, obviously it would preserve longer. It's kind of the same thing where the environment that the apple is in is really like either helping it or hindering it. And that's how I like to think of our homes.
I don't think a lot of people think about their home affecting them as much as it does.
I don't think so. Yeah, I think a lot of times we focus on what we're eating and, maybe our stress management, our movement, and then home kind of comes at the end. And quite often, home changes don't get realized, people don't realize they could change their home until something huge happens. Could be mold exposure, could be maybe they're suffering from a chronic disease and noticing that chemicals are very sensitive, their body's very sensitive to chemicals or to scents. And then all of a sudden, we're trying to heal the body instead of prevent. And so it's kind of like if we can get to this point of just prevention before the body is so negatively impacted that we have to now try to heal and then maintain. I think that's a spot that would be lovely for people to be in. But again, it's a lot of it kind of this education piece. And I think, your body can naturally detox, but when you're in a space that has your body kind of burdened down and trying to detoxify all of these chemicals and, toxins from your home, it doesn't have the space it needs to then naturally detox other things. And so you just kind of get to this burdened down state, really. And so I think prevention is great, but again, we don't realize it until after it's maybe we're well into trying to heal.
Yeah, isn't that the case for so many things? As humans, we don't, prevention sounds amazing, but we don't often take action until we really, really need to, and then we're more reactive.
Yeah, it's very true.
So, how do we know if our home is healthy or not? I think that this is an area that, as people learn more about it, they want to create a healthy home, but it can be overwhelming and you can look around and have no idea, right? Because you can't necessarily see the toxins, even mold you can't see sometimes.
Yeah, this is very true. And really, I think what it boils down to is kind of understanding what things to look at. Because once you know kind of what to look at, you can get rid of a little bit of that overwhelm because it can be overwhelming. Our homes are huge spaces, especially when you're looking for multiple toxins, right? Um, I think some really big indicators are how high your moisture levels are in your home. A lot of people go, well, I have no idea how do I tell? Well, you have to kind of like, you have to use some tools. I like to recommend people get just a little hygrometer. It tells you the humidity in each room. You can move it from room to room, and they're like $10 on Amazon. It's one of my favorite healthy house tools because usually everybody can afford one. Um, Once we kind of know what humidity levels are, that can start to give us an idea of how healthy your space is. So ideally, we want humidity levels somewhere between 35 and 40%. Now, in different rooms, this might be very difficult to attain. Bathrooms, laundry rooms, kitchens, those are very humid spaces. So we just try to keep it as low as possible. A room that has really high humidity levels generally will be a room that can have increased mold or mildew, but also VOCs tend to off gas when the environment is hot and humid. So if you have very high levels of humidity, in addition to maybe like a warm environment, our homes are generally warm. Some of the materials, building materials or home products or textiles can off gas at a higher rate, exposing you to more VOCs. So that's just something that's kind of like, that's usually one of the big things. If your home is very dusty, that's also a telltale sign that there are actually a lot of toxins probably in throughout the air. We know that house dust that has been tested, 100% of those samples contain phthalates. A lot of house dust also contains pesticides. When we think about like our textiles and like, little tiny particles coming off of our textiles and ending up in our air, a lot of those textiles have formaldehyde on them or different chemicals to waterproof them or make them stain resistant or wrinkle resistant. And so there's so many toxins that actually end up in our dust that are very harmful to us. If you have kids, we know that kids actually ingest more house dust than anybody else because of their proximity to the floor, because of their hand to mouth habits. And so, keeping your house as dust free as possible is a great way to kind of keep toxins at bay. And usually, it's one of those things where it's a free change. You don't have to go buy anything. It might just be changing your habits a little bit. But if you're in your home and you're smelling kind of a musty mildew smell, that can be a telltale sign. If you have a lot of condensation on windows and walls, that's a sign that your house could be unhealthy. Um, Even like chemical smells. Sometimes people say, I get this chemical smell in certain areas. It's not necessarily everywhere, but that's also a sign that we could change something in the home or ventilate it better to make sure that we're not getting that. Because usually some sort of smell that smells like a chemical is a toxin or a chemical.
Okay, those are really useful things to do. We actually bought one of those, correct me if I say this wrong, hygrometer. Is that what it
Yeah,
was? Yeah,
yeah.
we bought one of those because we were we had a very wet summer and we were trying to monitor levels. So in the winter, it's very, very dry in here. But I know in springtime, that's going to be something that we're going to have to really assess.
Yeah, and the great thing with the just battery powered hygrometers is, you can move it from space to space because spaces will be different. But then, like you said, seasons will be different too. There's different, so really it's such a useful tool because our homes aren't going to be steady across the board all the time. Our habits change, the humidity levels, which I think that's what it's very helpful for is, if you are noticing, gosh, every time I cook pasta in the kitchen, the humidity levels just skyrocket. Well, you could figure out, can I do that a little different? Can I use a lid? Can I use a vented fan? Can I open a window? And so it gives you kind of a little bit of this data, if you will, that can help you change your habits. Or, will the humidity in your bathroom continue to raise after a shower, or if you wipe down the shower, squeegee it, hang up towels, leave the fan on, will the humidity dissipate quicker? So there's all these, things that you can do. You don't necessarily have to call a contractor in and, have like work done in your home. You can actually just change some of your habits too.
Yeah, I love that. There's so many things that we can experiment with, can't we? Like you just
Yes.
list off so many. And even with the dusting, that's something that is free. It's something we can do all the time to just keep our houses healthier. And when you mentioned mold there, if our humidity is low, say it's below 40, or what did you say, 35 to 40 is optimal, does that kill the mold or does that just keep it from not growing? Like, is it an issue if you have mold in your house and then you keep humidity low, or is it still something you want to address?
Yeah, that is such a great question. Yes, I would say definitely address it still. Even, so keeping humidity levels low basically just creates an environment that mold does not grow as rapidly in. It can still grow, especially so if we think about mold, food for mold is dust and debris or a porous surface like sheetrock or drywall, or carpeting or something like that, and moisture, and really any moisture. So if the mold is there because you have condensation, even if your humidity levels are ideal, if you have that condensation plus, the food for mold, it can still grow and it can still expand and colonize. And so if you see mold, I would definitely say address it sooner than later because it can become a bigger problem very quickly. General rule of thumb is drying things out completely and totally like at the 24-hour to 48-hour mark is ideal, if you had some sort of leak or something. So if you ever had like a leak, lots of condensation, definitely keep an eye on those spots and make sure that you don't see anything growing, and be really diligent about keeping your levels low. But yes, if you see visible mold, definitely that's something I would say address and address quickly, so that it doesn't impact your space down the road.
And when you say address it, how do we do that other than in that first 24 to 48 hours of drying up the space? If you notice it, I don't know, 6 months later or
Yeah.
whenever, like a
Yeah,
while
there's
later.
yeah, there's different routes you can take and it definitely is dependent on what you're seeing, how much, where it is, how it happened, how long it's been there. So there's all these nuances. You can definitely call in professionals, and I would say when you call in a professional, ask lots of questions, make sure they really are doing more than just a mold test. So, what we want to do is we want to have someone who can not only do a mold test, but can also do a mold inspection, not just a visual inspection. We want them using moisture meters, even thermal imaging cameras. If it's a space where you're okay opening things up, definitely go that route. But someone who's very knowledgeable about inspecting for mold, but then also testing, because pairing these two things together is very helpful. When we test for mold, it can tell us the what the mold spores are, so what type of mold, and then it can also tell us how much. So how much is in the air? A lot of times these are air tests. And so it will draw in, a sampling of air. It'll tell us how many raw spores are in the air. And then we can tell if they're elevated or not. You could also do a swab test. They would do a swab test of some kind. So they would just take really a swab, send it into a lab, and that lab would be able to tell you what kind of mold spores are there, which can be helpful. Some people already know that they're very sensitive to different types of mold spores. And so this would, then we would want to have it maybe professionally removed or just take extra precautions. I think with mold, anytime taking as many precautions as possible is definitely the side we want to be on, err on the side of caution, uh, just because it can be a bigger problem to our health and wellness than I think a lot of us realize. I think a lot of, like we might have you hear people say like, oh, it's no big deal, you just like wipe it up. And sometimes that's the case. And if you're not someone who's sensitive, that might be just fine for you. But just know that sometimes multiple mold exposures can impact your body different at, you know, as you ever exposed more down the road. And so I think having it tested and having a professional come in is definitely helpful. You can do some testing yourself. You could buy a kit. I don't love those just because I am used to the professional ones and I find that they're just much more accurate in terms of what's there. I think a lot of it has to do with administering the test. A lot of us aren't trained, if you're a homeowner, you're not trained to go in and take a mold test. So I like to do just the more professional route, and really get a good idea of what's going on in the space before moving forward.
That makes a lot of sense. It seems like something, yeah, that you want to do correctly, so you might as well get the appropriate support for.
Yes, definitely.
You've mentioned a few ways that we can make shifts in our home, like looking at the humidity levels and working around how we can reduce those and dusting. Are there other big things that we can do to shift and improve the health of our home? Like, what are
Yeah.
some of the kind of main things that you would suggest for people?
Yeah, that's it's great because we really can pair together these like small changes or small habit shifts with bigger changes. And so I always like to start with the smallest amount of effort for the biggest impact, right, on your space. And so with that, we start to look at, okay, what maybe has the largest surface area? And so flooring is actually one of the best ways that you can, if you're going to do a big project, consider your flooring, especially if you have carpet in your home. Going with a toxin-free, smooth surface flooring is a great way to reduce a lot of toxins in one project. Um, so that's one that I really like. I mean, you can repaint or make sure that if you have like an older house that could potentially maybe have like lead paint that we're like almost encapsulating it so that we don't have like lead in the dust and things like that. Paint is a big one. If you're gonna paint, definitely use a totally VOC free paint, and then use something that is has has really clean ingredients, not necessarily just like a low VOC from the hardware store. I know a lot of them like make them they look like they're great and you think that they're like perfectly healthy. But there's so much more that goes into them that they don't necessarily disclose. And so paint is a great thing that you can do. One of the big ways that I like to, really make a home healthier is focus on your electronic use in your bedroom. So, we live in this very connected world. And while I don't think we should just like get rid of all electronics together, I think we can use them in a much healthier way. And especially in our bedrooms where we're sleeping. And so I like to really encourage getting all electronics that you can out of your room completely. And if you can't get it out of your room, at least get it 2 to 6 feet away from your head where you're sleeping. So that means phone chargers. And a lot of people, this is the thing I hear is, well, I just put my phone on airplane mode and it's fine. And the truth is it's not just your phone, it's the actual charger that gives off EMFs. And so the charger in and of itself is actually producing high levels and we have it like right next to our head so often on our nightstand. So getting electronics as far out of your space as you can. If you have like a baby monitor, we still have a baby monitor for my 4-year-old because you always need something. Um, Keeping it just maybe across the room. So maybe that's something that you're like, I really have to have that. And I totally understand. Just maybe don't have it right next to your head. If you can turn up the volume, put it maybe on a dresser or something. So that's a great way to reduce toxins in your bedroom space. And then, improving indoor air quality might look like opening your windows more frequently, maybe investing in an air purifier, keeping shoes out of the house. It's a great, super simple way to really reduce toxin exposure in your home. And then the last thing is focusing on some sort of water treatment, whether, you do a whole house filter or maybe you do a pitcher even. I mean, any filter is better than nothing. But then pairing it with something for your shower, especially if you live in a city where they chlorinate the water, which most cities do because they have to disinfect it, that's a great way to improve your space.
Those are such useful points. Can you talk a bit more in detail about a few of those? I'm curious about the
Yeah.
toxin-free flooring. What,
Yes.
give us some
I,
examples. Like, what
yeah.
is that? Is that
Yeah.
hardwood or what else?
Mhm. Hardwood is one of the best. I mean, it's a very toxin-free flooring, comes from nature. There are some things you can look for. Obviously, we want responsibly sourced hardwood, and we want to use like a some sort of finish on it that is completely VOC free, completely toxin free, uses clean ingredients. And so sometimes, there are different options with hardwood. Sometimes you can get it pre-finished, sometimes you can get it raw and someone finishes it in your home. So you have options that way, but I would say that is a great option. Obviously, we wouldn't put that probably like in a bathroom, just because of the water. And so for that, we would go with a tile of some kind. And there's lots of options for low toxin, toxin-free tiles nowadays. Um, and then looking at toxin-free grout and thin set to make sure that everything that's curing is not giving off VOCs. So those are some really great options. There are more options all the time. I know that you can find engineered wood that is very low in toxins. You just have to kind of find the right brand. I have a lot of information on my website about flooring because it can be very confusing to start looking at. Vinyl typically is not a healthy option for flooring. Even there are a few options for like a luxury vinyl, but it's very few and far between. I would only use that if it's something that, that's the only thing that you can put in. I would definitely go with hardwood, tile. Cork flooring is a great option for like lower levels where we're trying to insulate and keep it a little bit warmer. So there's lots of options. And then really thinking about what we're putting on it. If we're using an adhesive, let's make sure that it's something that is toxin free, that's not off gassing. And so, it's more than just the flooring. Oftentimes, it can be the things that go with it. Carpets, there are a few toxin free options. They're usually wool. So, a lot of people who maybe have, sensitivities to wool, there really are not a whole lot of options out there for them. So, and again, it can kind of hold on to toxins because of the fibers. And so a lot of times we don't recommend it anyways. We would recommend a rug. But I know that there are families where maybe you just really want carpet in like a family room or to make something feel cozy. There are some options, but definitely not as many as some of the hard surface flooring.
And when you talk about off-gassing, is that something that will continue to happen, or is it more like 90%? I'm just making up a number, but
Yeah.
90% of off-gassing happens in the first week or something. Like, or is
Yeah.
it just always happening?
Yeah, so every VOC can be a little bit different. The general rule of thumb is, like if you build a new house, there's so much off-gassing in that first year and a half to 2 years. That's usually when it's the highest. It does drop off, but it will still off-gas for the remainder of the material. There are some VOCs that actually off-gas higher as they age. So it is kind of like it really depends on what VOCs are in the material. Um, I would say most often the case is it is off-gassing at the highest levels for the first 2 years. Then it does kind of drop off. But again, that kind of depends on what it is. And formaldehyde is kind of in that category too, where it's off-gassing, and that's how we're being exposed to that as well.
Okay. And when you were talking about paints, you said that not only should we look for zero VOC paints, but we should be looking for paints that are clean in other respects, like with other ingredients.
Yeah.
It seems like there's so much marketing out there, not just for paints, but for everything when it comes to the house, saying that they're green and they're clean. How do we
Yeah.
know as a consumer? Like, I just would have assumed, okay, low VOC or no VOC, that's probably better than other options, but how do we
Yeah.
find the even better ones?
Right. So, what it boils down to is the way that they can advertise on these products is not always super transparent. So, like if it says zero VOC, that can mean for the base of the paint. Once you add colors to the paint, which most often we do, the colors can have VOCs. So, really, when we say low VOC, it is for the base paint and it is a range. So, zero VOC is a range, ultra low VOC is a range, low VOC is a range. And so it's like this like kind of it doesn't give you the true like picture of really what it is. And so many products will say green. Green is not any sort of term that is regulated. And so anybody can put it on their product. They even kind of make their product to look like they won't even use the word green or healthy or anything, but they kind of just make it look natural. Like one of my favorite, and this isn't like in the building world, but like Mrs. Myers never says organic, never says green, never says that it's like healthy in any way. But for some reason, we all think this. When we look at that product, even though it contains fragrances and chemicals in it, and it's just the way that they've used the fonts, they've used imagery. And so it's kind of the same with building materials. They can make it look really beautiful, and it kind of is a form of greenwashing. So I actually like to say you almost have to do research before you go. It's not something where I think a lot of times we can trust our intuition at the store because they don't list ingredients on these packages or materials really. So if you were to go look at flooring, they don't have a list of everything that's in it. We would have to go find um like a sheet, so an SDS, which would give us what is in that product. And usually that is where they disclose different chemicals that might be giving off VOCs, chemical emissions, things like that. It can be very hard to find these for very specific products. So for example, like flooring. If like Shaw Flooring makes a line of flooring for Home Depot, they don't sell that same one at Menards. And so, or at Lowe's. And so you would have to find the SDS sheet for each one that you're looking. So it can just get very tedious, and it can be a little like you can't just go to the store and just expect to know all these things. And so I almost think doing research ahead of time and knowing what to look for is kind of the key. And planning ahead. That's a lot of what I teach is how do we make a plan so that it's not overwhelming when you start a project? Because if you were to sit and start, you go, oh, I think we're going to go look at flooring at the store, and you went to the store, you would be completely overwhelmed. It's like you have to start at home, kind of narrow down what you're looking for, and then go that route so that you're not overwhelming yourself or wasting time in your project. And so planning out and researching is like the key, I think, to any of those bigger projects in your home.
And is this something that you work with people on?
Yeah. So I do a lot of consulting, especially on projects. So whether it's, a small project where you're just going to be, maybe replacing carpet with smooth surface flooring in a room, all the way up to huge renovations where we're, going down to the studs and putting everything in new. I work with homeowners to kind of bridge the gap between their contractor and their designer or their decorator and these products and kind of coming up with a plan. Here's everything that we need as far as materials go. Here is, what we need as far as just the the grouts and the sealants and any sort of like adhesive that's used, and then making sure that it's a product that their contractor feels comfortable working with. So really coming up with a plan ahead of time on this is what we need. This is a healthy way to install it. And, this is what we would like the contractor to do. And if they come back and say, I can't, use this or that, then we start to go down the route of let's find at least a low toxin option that they're comfortable with. Because so many contractors, they just do the installation. They know that really well. They know how to, apply the product, but maybe don't know about the toxins and chemicals that are in the product. And so it's really kind of bridging that gap between the two.
That seems like such important work. Hopefully, that more and more building biologists are around and this becomes a normal part of building places. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, I think, there's this movement towards that. Especially with, the focus right now is really on new builds. I work with a committee to with the Change the Air Foundation. They're really trying to come up with a set of building practices for new homes. But then what do we do with renovations? So many of us are not in a position where we're necessarily going to go build a new home. How can we have these same practices kind of in our own homes as we're updating or changing spaces? And so that's really what it's for, is kind of, there really aren't standards necessarily for renovations that make them healthy across the country or even state to state. And so kind of stepping in to do that work, I think, is so important, because I can't tell you how many times people change something in their house, bring in a new product, and then all of a sudden they're like not feeling good, or they realize, like their body doesn't do well with these VOCs that are off-gassing. And, at that point, the project's done. How can you mitigate? But if we had thought about it before the project, I think we could be in such a better place, health-wise and home-wise.
And what can we do if we're, say, looking for a new home? Are there specific things that I would imagine like humidity is part of that, but what are other things that we can be looking for when we're looking to buy or
Yeah.
move?
I think first and foremost is really being diligent about looking for moisture and water damage. Water damage always shows unless it has been covered up. That is the case sometimes, but generally you can see some sort of evidence that there was moisture. And so I think truly, I don't know how it is around the whole country. In Minnesota, a lot of people forego home inspections and do not make their purchase agreement contingent on a home inspection because we just don't have the inventory, right? And so people are walking through homes themselves. Even if you can hire a home inspector, I'm actually doing this tomorrow. Hire a home inspector to just walk through with you at a showing and point things out. You will be in such a better position to identify problem areas. They know what to look for. And oftentimes, like, we're just not, then, you're not trained. Why would you, why would this be part of your training, right? To buy a house. We trust professionals. And so I would say looking for water damage is first and foremost. And then you want to kind of look at maybe like air quality considerations. Does the home have, forced air and filters that can be changed? Does it have an air exchange system? These are like pluses, right? These are like, oh, this would make it a very healthy space. Whereas water and moisture, we want to avoid. If we see that, we should not necessarily run, and like leave the house to let someone else buy, but really take into consideration, is this something that needs to be addressed by a professional before I move in? And so really it's looking all around the house. We think about moisture coming in from outside. It can also be interior plumbing leaks. It can also be in the form of condensation due to other things in the house, like insulation and things like that. If you're looking at an old house, definitely keep your eye out for signs that there could be lead or asbestos in the house. And so that is like looking for a certain size tile on the floor. 9 by 9 typically can be it could be asbestos if you have like tiles on your floor, or ceiling tiles that are this 9 by 9 size. Lead paint, if it's cracking or chipping anywhere, that's a huge sign that there could potentially be lead dust in the house. And then, like starting to look at like possibly testing the house for mold or for radon, things like that. And so there's a lot to look at. So it takes a couple passes through the house to really figure this out. And I think hiring a home inspector can be such a great and useful tool to really give you another set of eyes because that's what they're trained to do. And like I said, even if you don't want to make your purchase contingent on that, maybe have them walk through with you at just a showing. They can't do as much or give you as much of their time because often it's just kind of this like little hour block, but they could definitely point something out that could save you from making the wrong choice in a house.
And when you say a home inspector, is that a building biologist or is that different to a building biologist?
Yeah, so typically that's different. Would be someone who like inspects your house for a real estate purchase. And so it would be someone who's like usually certified by INTERNACHI or the American Home Inspectors Association. Um, or maybe they're certified or licensed state by state. Some states do require a license. I live in Minnesota, they do not. And so it is someone who really just knows the ins and outs of a house. Oftentimes, these inspectors can identify things like mold and they do test for radon. You might have to try to find someone who understands more of that or get yourself prepared to ask a lot of questions. I actually have on my website just a list of questions you can ask a home inspector or you should be asking, which can be really helpful as you walk through a house to try to understand if it's a healthier space or not. When you're, just kind of walking in and you're only there for maybe an hour to 2 hours.
And if we shift back to our homes that we're living in at the moment and not looking at buying places, what are some other small things that we can do in the home? Like, are there certain rooms we should be starting with that are more toxic than other ones? Or, yeah, what do you suggest?
Yeah, I love to start in the bedroom because that is where we're spending the majority of our time when we're at home because we're often sleeping there. So any sleeping space that you have in your house is a great place to start. Really getting that room really healthy for specifically sleep. So not necessarily, so it's going to look a little bit different than the rest of your house. So getting electronics out, if you were to make a long-term plan, there are things that you can do right away. So getting electronics out is super easy. Making sure the space is as free from dust as possible, super easy. But then moving on to bigger things. If your room has carpet, could you consider doing a smooth surface flooring? Would you consider replacing your mattress down the road, going with something that's less toxic, more toxin free, and then starting to look at components of our bedding, really. So pillows, you think about pillows, that's a great thing to replace. It's right next to your face. You're breathing into it all night. Sheets, blankets, even your bed frame. I mean, so you can really start to, once you start looking around, you could go, okay, let's put this in order of importance. So I always think do the things you can do right away, right? So the electronics, the dusting. And then let's think about like cost and maybe impact. Pillow would probably be next. And then maybe we'd work on a mattress. That's a big purchase. That's usually something that requires quite a bit of research because everybody's different in what type of mattress they want. but getting something that is low toxin at least, that doesn't have flame retardants, that doesn't have, foams that contain chemicals. We want something that's, organic. GOTS certified is the global organic textile standard, and GOLS certified is the global organic latex standard. These are great things to look for when we're looking at a mattress. And then moving on to bedding, and maybe flooring down the road, keeping the humidity levels in your room as low as possible, is a great thing you could do. So you could, in the morning, open your shades, make sure that we are allowing airflow by the window to prevent any sort of condensation that's just going to sit there. Unblock vents that are in the room, so don't have them blocked by furniture. Use a ceiling fan, open your windows if you can, either at night or during the day, just to allow fresh air in. Those are some really basic things you can do while you plan ahead.
That
And
sounds
then,
great. Yeah, there's so
yeah,
many things there that are like doable
yes,
right now, and then bigger things you can do forward. And then before you move on to other rooms, I just
yeah,
wanted to ask you about the mattress.
yeah.
Do you recommend latex mattress or what are some of your favorites?
Yeah, so I actually do like the organic latex. So we want latex that is harvested from a rubber tree, harvested obviously in a very sustainable and healthy way, no chemicals added. But so I think looking for that gold certification is really a great thing that you can start looking for. It kind of weeds things out right away, gives you a more narrow pick of what to look for or what you could choose from, essentially. So I actually do like that better just personally than like a wool or a cotton blend. I like it. I like to have that structure underneath me. And that's just personal preference. Some people might be fine, on something that's more of an organic wool or an organic cotton blend of some kind without the foam. And some people have latex allergies, and so they really don't have that option. So there's so many routes you can go. And so that's why I say it takes so much research because we're all so specific about what works for our body, as well as finding something that's low toxin.
Yeah, I can see that. And sorry,
Yeah.
I cut you off there. Were you going to
Oh,
move to another room? What's after the bedroom? What do you
yeah. So,
recommend?
yeah. So after the bedroom, I typically like to go kitchen because not only are we, um, eating in the space, but generally it's kind of the gathering hub for a lot of families. You're in the kitchen, from the time maybe your kids come home from school till dinner time. You're in there for a long period of time. And I think there's so many items that we can start focusing on as far as, our pots and pans, getting plastic out of our kitchen as far as like food storage or snack bags or whatever it may be. And then paying attention to how our habits are while we're cooking. Are we using the vented fan? Do we, open a window? Is there a lot of like smoke or, like steam or whatever coming from our food? Those are all things that impact our indoor air quality. And so, really trying to mitigate that as much as possible while you're cooking is a great way to create a healthier environment in the kitchen. When you're thinking about like, oh, cleaning the floors, well, are we cleaning it with something that's just pushing dust around, and so now we've created even more dust in the air, or are we using a wet mop and then even wiping it down so that all of that moisture isn't just being added to the air, right? So it's just a lot of habit changes. Cleaning your sink drain, which can be a space where mold and bacteria can live and stay. And then I like to really focus on your water and making sure that we are filtering water in some way, shape, or form. It's all about what works with your budget and where you live. If you're renting, obviously you might just have to get some sort of pitcher. Better than nothing. And there are better pitchers than others. If you can add some sort of reverse osmosis system for your drinking water, that's always beneficial. So there's lots of things that we can, like I said, do right away and then plan for in the future. If you're going to do a remodel, that opens up a whole nother set of opportunities to make the space healthier down the road, as far as like getting the right countertop material, using toxin-free adhesives, making sure that our cabinets are healthy too.
Yeah, so a lot of things that we can do starting today with our kitchen, but also
Yeah.
really big changes that we can make if we're doing renos.
Yes, absolutely. That's kind of the idea is melding it all together.
And you like just thinking again about the mattress, what about furniture? Should we be looking at furniture that has that GOT certification, or is there something else when we're looking for low tox furniture? Because so much furniture has plastic and formaldehyde and flame retardants. It's hard to know where to begin there. Any suggestions?
Yeah. So it is, there's definitely a level, different levels of what the toxicity is and where the toxins are in the furniture. So I think first and foremost, know that you don't have to just like replace all of your furniture, but as you are replacing pieces, definitely look for things that are solid wood, things that don't bring in a lot of plywood particle board MDF, which is medium density fiberboard. Medium density fiberboard, I kind of like to think of like if you ever look at like the white cube units at like IKEA, medium density fiberboard. That's what we're looking at there. And it can off gas quite a bit because it's basically glued together wood particles. And that glue, because they need it so strong, gives off a lot of VOCs, as well as the coating and the finish. So avoiding that for sure, avoiding plastic furniture or furniture that has plastics in it, opting for solid wood. A great tip that I love this tip, but I tend to be more, I'm fine with maybe a little DIY is finding unfinished hardwood or softwood furniture, and finishing it yourself, or even paying a contractor to come in and finish it with your product because you can easily find, Home Depot has, they have so many options as far as unfinished wood furniture. You could get coffee tables, dining room tables. I mean, they have kind of this huge inventory of it, and then you can easily find toxin-free stains, finishes, paints, and so you can kind of make it your own. Um, but if you want to get like upholstered furniture, that is where I think a lot of people have a hard time finding what they want in the price range they want. And so with that, I say a lot of times, like maybe start to go just low toxin, not totally toxin free. Look for something that doesn't contain flame retardants. Usually, like typically new furniture being manufactured now does not contain flame retardants. They have to have a tag that tells you if there are flame retardants in it. And so that's a great thing to look for when you're looking for furniture is kind of looking at that tag. Um, if you can find something that has a natural latex, that's great. The Global Organic Textile Standard will help you, with the upholstery on the top. Even finding the Ecotech Standard label for any of the upholstery, that covers it is a great option to try to find something that's maybe not treated to be stain resistant or moisture resistant. Those typically add chemicals. And so those are some spots where you can kind of start so that you can find something lower toxin instead of getting something totally toxin free, which also is typically something you have to order without sitting on it. And a lot of people don't like to do that either. They want to try it out before they bring it home.
Those are some great tips, and I love that now you can get furniture or that furniture now has to say if it has flame retardants in it. I didn't realize that
Yeah.
that was a thing. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think it was 2013, I want to say, is the year where that became the standard. And so typically things older than 2013, we say like probably has flame retardants. I mean, a lot of furniture still does, but now they have to have that tag that says that it does or doesn't.
That's amazing. So if somebody's listening to this and thinking, okay, I want to know more about this, I want to learn more, what resources do you have? Because I was on your website and you have so many. Can you tell us a little bit about like how people can work with you and all the resources that you have?
Yes, absolutely. So definitely on my website, I have so many free downloads that you can take advantage of, to kind of help you get started in your own home. I have an ebook that kind of is a good starting spot if you're like brand new to all of this and this is like feeling a little overwhelming. It's very step by step, kind of plans out the big things in the future in the ebook. But then we also talk about, hey, here are like things you could do like right away, really simple things that really just changing maybe your mindset a little bit around things or changing a few little habits. I do a lot of consultations ranging from people who just want to try to get some chemicals out of their house and they're not sure where to start, all the way up to, building a home and choosing toxin-free materials that way. Every now and then throughout the year, I do release a few courses that are a little bit more robust. They're kind of bridging the gap between, working with me one-on-one and then the free downloads. And that can be really helpful too. And then even just like following me, like on Instagram, I try to go on several times a week with just little tips. I write a weekly blog post that can be a great thing to kind of walk you through a particular space in your house, or maybe get rid of a particular toxin. I like to kind of narrow it down and focus on one small part of your house, to kind of get you through that. And it usually comes with some resources that you could save and use down the road too.
That's great. And can you just let us know? I will have this in the show notes, but just for listeners, if they're not looking at show notes, what your website is and what your
Yeah.
Instagram is.
Yeah, so if you go to healthyhouseontheblock.com, definitely hit the start here page. I have that kind of organized by room and space. And so it can be, if there's a particular spot you want to start, it's a really great way to kind of get going. On Instagram, it's Healthy House on the Block. That's where I'm most active. And then I have a YouTube channel that's Healthy House on the Block as well, where every week I kind of break down what's in the blog post, but in a video format. So you could even just listen to it if you wanted to, and just makes it a little easier to consume that way.
Amazing. So we've talked about so many different things today. I'm wondering, was there anything that you wanted me to ask or anything you wanted to talk about or you think would be important for listeners to know that we didn't talk about?
I think one thing I always like to reiterate is we don't want to have stress around creating a healthy house. I think really giving yourself some grace and knowing that your home will never be completely toxin free. Mine won't be either, and that's okay. Our bodies can really flourish even in a low toxin environment. And I think also to kind of make sure that we're not feeling guilty about choices that we've made in the past or things that we currently have in our home that are out of our control, that we maybe don't have the means to change right now. It's not in our budget to change right now, or, we're not going to you renovate our bathroom, whatever it may be. To really just remember that stress and that feeling of guilt are very toxic as well. And so it's okay. We can make plans to change things step by step, going forward, and you can change things now to make it healthier too, and your body will be able to really still detox any toxins that are in your house as we're making healthier and healthier changes.
I think that's such an important point and such a good one to end on because I know for myself when I started the journey into low tox living, it did become overwhelming, and that perfectionist side can try to take over, and that is
Yeah.
stressful in itself. So we are going to do it imperfectly. Our houses aren't going to be perfectly no tox, and that's okay. I think that's a very, very important point. So thank you for addressing that as well.
Of course. Yeah, I think it's always keep that in the back of your mind while you're moving forward.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much for coming on and telling us all about this and yeah, providing so many different resources and information and directions for our listeners to make their house a healthier place.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation. I think, um, yeah, as we move forward, hopefully more and more homes become healthier and healthier, and we all kind of embrace this idea of our homes as a second skin.
Yeah, that would be great. And more building biologists out there, it becoming just part of the process of building homes, buying homes, and renovating.
Yeah, absolutely.